Morning, everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome to SKC Office Hours. I'm Sarah Krom, Managing Partner of SKC & Co. CPAs. As with all of our office hours, a recording of this link will be emailed to you later today, and we'll also post it on the resource section of our website so you can revisit it or share it with a colleague. We want this program, as all of our programs, to be as beneficial to you as possible, so please use the chat to ask any questions or make any comments. We'll be monitoring it all morning. So today's topic fits right into SKC's internal theme for 2024, which is the Year of Our People. Now, we had a previous office hours this year that was about mental health and overwhelm, and today we're going to focus on how to live your best life. Now, this sounds like a daunting task, but I really believe that this is more than possible if you have a systematized approach, and it makes it much easier. And I do want to say that what we discussed today can apply to a business owner who's in an overwhelmed or stressful situation, any leader within an organization, and then your overall team in that organization. So our guest today is one of my very favorite humans. It's mostly because I'm married to him. We have Andrew Donofrio this morning. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning.
So Andrew is the owner of Andrew Donofrio LLC, and he focuses on personal and professional development. And he specifically focuses on challenging success for individuals in all areas of their lives, whether it be personal, professional, financial, health. He comes from a 25-year career in law enforcement. He had a technology company after retirement, and he has been in his current role for close to 10 years. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
So I do want to raise one housekeeping point to everyone on the call today. Since the host and the guest are in the same house, of course, they are paving our road today. So not that I expect you to hear that, but in the event that you hear our wonderful golden doodle react to the fact that they're paving our road today, we apologize in advance, and we'll pick up as soon as we can get him to either settle down or move him to another room. So appreciate your patience if that has to happen. And I'm hoping, because I told you, it won't happen now. So we'll see. So let's kick this off. Andrew, I want to do a little bit of level setting with the audience, and I'd love for you to give a little bit more background on your coaching practice and how it evolved to where it is today. So you started off coaching predominantly executives in leadership positions and then employees in their professional capacities. But can you tell us why and how you made the shift to coaching people across all areas of their lives?
Sure. Yeah. So I started in that realm because that was where I felt most of my experience was, right? So I was in law enforcement and I was in leadership position after only 4 years, and it kind of carried through my career. So I felt pretty uniquely prepared given what I had experienced in law enforcement and also my education. So that's where I focused. And I think there was a part of it that was a little bit of ego too. It was like, I'm a professional development and leadership coach, and I stayed away from that idea of life coaching. It seemed too touchy-feely. But what I started to discover was that when people I was coaching, whether they were staff members that employers wanted them coached, or whether they were executives that wanted to learn communication or better leadership, they would come to sessions with everything. So, while we might be planning on talking about, their leadership, their communication, empathy, and those types of subjects, what would invariably happen is they would come with a problem in the relationship. They would come with a problem with their children. They would come with a problem with their health. And so over time, I call them presuppositions. There were several presuppositions, things that we hopefully suppose are true if we're going to grow and develop, that I incorporated in my practice. And one of them was we suck at compartmentalizing, right? We're just not good at it. And so we think we can isolate an area, but we can't. So it caused me to pause. And there were some pivotal moments in there, but it caused me to take a step back and say, okay, human beings are complex. The idea that we're going to focus on one issue in this environment is probably misguided. So I went back and really dove in to educate myself in a lot of areas of coaching. I leveraged my psychology degree to bring more to the environment, to bring more to my clients. And so that's kind of currently where I'm at. So there are some professionals, obviously, but there's a healthy amount of life coaching, relationship coaching, financial coaching that comes into play also.
Because we are all multifaceted humans.
Exactly.
So let's start with setting the stage for the conversation. What does it mean to live your best life?
It's a great question. I wish I had like a single line answer, but I don't. I'll tell you what I would say it doesn't mean first. When people come into coaching, and often when they come into therapy, they come with the idea like, I want to improve my happiness, I want more joy in my life. I want fulfillment. And that's good. Those are the things we want for sure. And those are absolutely salient objectives and goals that we should have. But sometimes the interpretation of that in this environment and in a therapeutic environment is that I don't want anxiety in my life. I don't want bad moods and depression in my life. Not the goal, because that's a part of our makeup and a part of our biology. Anxiety serves a purpose. Depressive moods come into play just because of life circumstances. So the idea of living our best life is to create that balance, is to be able to deal with anxiety when it arises in a healthy way, to be able to extricate ourselves from depressive moods when they come up, to deal with life challenges in a healthy way. And so we want to tip the scale where we have that life of joy, fulfillment, happiness to the extent that we can, and limit and minimize those negative feelings, those negative thoughts. That's really the goal, and how to manage all that. So that's when I talk about living our best life, it's fulfillment in many areas of our life.
And I like sort of the general theme of living your best life, because sometimes I find that, or many times I find that people don't actually know what they're missing or what should be different. They just know that what is doesn't feel right, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So what would you say are the key components to living your best life?
So the way that I approach it, regardless of when somebody comes into coaching, is I approach it sort of holistically, right? So we want to look at and examine the areas of our life. This is kind of exactly what you're alluding to. When somebody goes into therapy or when somebody goes into coaching, and they are different, there's no question. There's a lot of similarities, but they're different for sure. But when they enter a coaching environment, sometimes it's the first time that somebody's challenged them to think about the quality of their relationships, to think about where they are financially and where they want to be in the future, to think about their health, their wellness, their profession. How is that going? What opportunities do you have for change? How long do I want to work? So it's this idea that we're going to start by being very introspective. That's the beginning place. That's the starting point for all conversations. So really, the key components are first identifying the areas of your life that we want to make an impact in. And there's several things that I do to kind of get us there. But I think, like I said, it's the first time somebody's really challenged themselves to look at those areas. And then from there, once we look at it, we can identify where we want to set objectives for coaching and in life, if you will.
And what does it mean to utilize a holistic approach to living your best life, right? Because I think we hear that term holistic, a holistic approach as a phrase in many different areas. And, sometimes we say things and we don't necessarily know what they mean in certain applications.
Yeah, so if I go back to that presupposition that I started with, it would be, that idea that we're horrible at compartmentalizing. And when we acknowledge that, like, people will come to a coaching environment and say, I want to work on my profession, I want to work on my future and my leadership and, where I want to get to professionally. And maybe they're struggling financially, or maybe they're struggling with a health issue. The idea that we can put that into a box and say that that won't impact the rest of our life is misguided, because it's going to bleed over. If you're having troubles financially, it's going to impact your marriage. If you're having troubles in your marriage, it's going to impact your relationship with your kids. It's going to impact how you fire at work. People will come to me and say, it's just a job. Well, yeah, okay, I can understand that perspective, but it's 8 hours a day of your life minimum. So the idea that we can put that in a box and not bring that home, which, by the way, is certainly an area of coaching when people are struggling professionally, relationships will always come into it, and how that's affecting the partner, the spouse, the significant other. So when we talk about a holistic approach, my goal is to try to get somebody to look at all areas, because we can do more than one thing at once. So somebody might come to me. In fact, if a company comes to me and says, we want to bring this employee into coaching because for whatever reason, whether they're struggling or whether they're looking for advancement or they're just kind of checked out, I'll always tell the employer or the stakeholder, look, you have to give me the ability to coach in other areas and to bring up other areas of their life. Ultimately, a happier person personally makes a happier employee, makes a happier, more productive staff member. So I've kind of divided it in 6 domains, 6 areas of life with some subcategories in there. But and I start with that very conversation. And I use a form to kind of draw that out. But that's what a holistic approach means. It's this idea that we're going to look at more than one area and try to make improvements, growth, development in more than one area of life.
So we don't really leave our baggage at the door when we come into the office or when we walk back into the house at night, is basically what you're saying.
Try as you might, but anybody that's had problems with a kid, when you're having child problems, it's going to permeate every aspect of your life. Failing marriage, it's going to permeate every aspect of your life. No, you don't check it at the door.
Do you find that the people that you work with are resistant to that thought process that, we can't compartmentalize or we suck at compartmentalizing?
Yeah, absolutely. People come in to the environment bragging about their ability to compartmentalize. Also, the other thing that I hear frequently is, I'm a great multitasker. Right? Your brain fires one way, one direction at one time. So the idea that you're going to go from one thing to the other, you're losing productivity. So I fight those preconceived notions very delicately, but I fight those preconceived notions. Yeah, I will talk about it because it's going to rear its head, right? Even if you were significantly stuffing down emotion, well, how is that going to manifest itself? Ultimately, it's going to manifest itself through physical health. And we all kind of know this. And what other outlets, healthy or unhealthy, are you using to kind of manage that? So yeah, we're certainly not of that ilk. And so it's my job to, in the beginning, especially, get people to understand, like, hey, let's look at this in its entirety. And this idea that you can put it in a box is not something you should carry around, because I would submit that you're probably not doing it as well as you think.
It's holding up that mirror in front of us, right?
Yeah, I certainly know I wasn't, right? I mean, that's the thing that I think is important to note. I'm not of the mindset that I come to this, especially in the beginning, like, that's it, I lived my best life, I'm ready to go. No, I'm not that Tony Robbins kind of guy where he had it figured out in his 20s. No, I often say that my practice is built on a lot of training, education, and experience, and the painstaking work I did earning my PhD in stupidity, right? So it was those mistakes and this idea that I was able to compartmentalize, that I was able to push things into a box. But hindsight, I realized the toll it took on me. And I also realized the outlets I used to compensate for that unhappiness. So that's what I kind of share in that environment as well, to try to take a look and say, hey, how's this manifesting itself?
So you talked a little bit about the big 6 areas, which we'll get into in a few minutes, but how do you begin to guide your clients through living their best lives? Where do you start?
I like to start, well, the very first thing that I like to do in coaching is an analysis. So I send out an online form, and I'm willing to send it out to anybody that's here today for sure. Not that it has to start anything, but it's a good introspective exercise. And it covers those 6 domains, those 6 areas of life, and it gives context to it. Some provocative questions in there, and then it breaks some things down in subcategories. And I have them rate it, from 1 to 10, how are you firing in this area? And then add some context. Why did you rate that number? And so that's the very first step. And that'll help us early on in the coaching relationship to establish objectives. With that, though, one of the very first things that I like to do is values elicitation, identifying your values. And when we think of values, most people think of the traditional things, like, I value love, I value honesty, I value happiness, I value connection. Those are all important things, and they do factor in to us setting objectives for ourselves. But if you take a step back and expand that and look at things like your profession, and somebody's looking at my career, I want to be a partner one day. Okay, that's a noble goal, but the question is why? What about being partner do you value? Well, maybe it's the financial piece. Nothing wrong with desiring more money. But if you have a lot of freedom in your life and you like to just pick up and go on vacation because you can work from anywhere, does partner fall in line with that? How much do you value that flexibility and that freedom? Do you like to work from home 4 days a week? And do you have that flexibility being a staff member and not a partner? And are you willing to give that up? So I like to start with really what's important to us, because if we design a life, whether it's a profession, a relationship, whatever it might be, that's in conflict with our values, it's a life of angst. It's a life of potential anxiety. So being clear on what's important to you is really the very first step. And so that's early in the process as well. Let's make sure that the goals we're setting are the right ones, because it's kind of lousy to hit a goal and say, wrong destination, right? A lot of time and energy spent, but yeah, I'm making the money, but I'm kind of unhappy. That was me in the technology business. Yep, I'm doing really well. I have this skill. Business is very successful, but I am wildly unhappy in this business for a multitude of reasons. So right steps, wrong goal.
So it's that misalignment in what your goals are with your values, essentially.
Exactly right. Yep. What's truly important to you and how do your values meet that up? And there's more we can probably will today expound on with values because it helps you to prioritize what's important. And I can kind of talk about that too.
Now, you use the term objectives when you start setting out in an initial or the first few meetings that you have with your clients. Do you use that term objectives synonymous with goals, or is that a different level of setting goals within your practice?
Great question. So objectives and vision I use interchangeably, right? That's sort of the long term, this is where I want to be. Goals are more short term. And, we're all familiar probably on this call with the SMART model, which I can quickly run through if anybody's not. But when we set up goals, we want them within that SMART model, but they're more short term. So the differentiation, right? Part of your vision statement is I want to be healthy. Healthy is not a measurable goal. It's not a specific goal, but it is a vision, right? So then we want to drill down on what does healthy mean to you, right? Maybe it's a specific weight, maybe it's a specific nutrition plan, maybe it's specific exercise, body fat, whatever it might mean for you. And then we set the goals up to get there, whether it's exercise or physical activity 5 days a week, whether it's meal planning, hydration, whatever it might be. That's where goals come in. So the vision, the objective, that I use interchangeably, and that's more longer out there and more less ephemeral, more broad.
Mm-hmm. So just before we jump into the big 6 areas in a little bit more detail about A, what they are, and then B, into each area, do you have advice for the audience about managing your time effectively to enhance overall well-being? Because a lot of what I hear from, whether they're colleagues inside SKC, clients that we work with, other friends that we have outside of, the work professional realm, is time. I don't have the time for ... And usually whatever fills in the ... is about us, right? I don't have time to do something for me, whatever that something or several somethings is. So what advice do you have before we kick off into the big 6 areas of how we can leverage and manage our time to make time for us? Because you and I both agree we can't afford not to.
Right. So, there's that fundamental reality that of the resources in life, and I'm certainly one now, not haven't always been, but I'm certainly one with an abundance mentality now. But time is finite. It's a resource, and that there is no abundance of time, if you will, right? That's 24 hours in a day and how we spend it. I again look at getting clear on what you value. So if somebody would say to me first that, I don't have time to work out. Well, if we suppose that's true, then you certainly don't have time to be sick, right? Because being sick is going to take much more time than it is to try to incorporate some healthy habits. The other thing that I often say too is let's not look at it based on the story in our head. I oftentimes hear people, when I was in college, I did double sessions. I do cardio in the morning and I'd lift at night. Well, that's great. But now with a full-time career, 2 kids, aging parents, are you getting double sessions in? No, but let's not go to that distortion, that cognitive distortion of all or nothing thinking. Let's look at it and say, what can you give me? What can we start with? What small change can we make? Can we do 3 times a week, 15 minutes a day? Physical activity, what does that look like? And build from there, incorporate it from there. I would guarantee you that anything that becomes important, you'll find the time for. When it's a must in your life and when you see it as a purpose in your life, you're going to find the time. Now, specific strategies, that's individual, right? So some people do very well with time blocking. I worked with a client yesterday who had a need for stretching given her past injuries. And we talked through, she said to me, this was her goal. I'm going to stretch first thing in the morning when I get up, right before I eat at night. Great. And sometime during the day, time out. Sometime during the day is going to get lost, right? So let's find out what works for you. Is it the same time? Can you do that? Is it an alarm on your phone that you set during the week? What does it look like? So we have to look at what strategy is going to work for her, for us, to make sure that we fit that in. Similarly, people often get discouraged about, oh, I didn't hit my goal. I had this again yesterday as well. A woman we set up 5 times a week. I want to exercise. She came back to the session. She said, I'm really disappointed in myself. I said, what happened? She said, I only hit 3. I said, okay, tell me why. Because sometimes there's a lot of information in why you didn't hit a goal. So I said to her, tell me why. She said, well, some of it was religious obligation. I had 2 things that I had to attend to with family. Okay, that's a competing priority. And it's important to recognize which one. I would submit that time with family and you still got 3 days of exercise in, we're good. Let's look at it appropriately and understand what does take the step, what is the priority.
Great. Thank you for that. So let's jump into the big areas of our holistic best life, right? And so we'll start with the first one, with which you kind of alluded to a little bit, which is the physical health, right? So what role does the physical health play in our holistic lifestyle?
When you break it down very simply, this is the machine that carries us forward to our dreams, our desires, our wants, right? So whatever it is we desire, if the machine breaks, we don't get there. So all the goals in the world, all the financial realizations, all the goals we have with being a parent, a grandparent, how we want to spend time with our children, with our loved ones, the things we want to accomplish, the philanthropy we might want to have in life, all those things do not work, do not come to fruition unless we take care of this. And getting clear on the why, that's important. And the why is different for other people. My why for taking care of this is different than others. A woman talked about, it's important for me to keep up with my son. He's in 3rd grade. He runs around like a nut. And I want to be able to keep up with him. Okay, well, that's a great vision, a great goal. So in order to achieve that, you have to then make sure that the machine is operating properly. So and again, that's also an ecological goal, the physical health. What do I mean by ecological? I mean, it impacts so many other areas of life. It's going to impact your mental health. It's going to impact your energy and productivity. So that is really key when we talk about current day productivity, current day effectiveness, and also future effectiveness and longevity.
Now, I know every person's different and every solution is not going to work for everybody, but do you have some suggestions for daily habits or routines, even small, blocks of minutes that people can put into their schedule to promote physical well-being?
Yeah, and I love the way you put it, physical well-being. That's the goal, right? We want, I would think most of us would agree that quality of life, longevity is a great mark, is a great place to be. But that aside, how do we get there? What do we do with it? So I like the idea of not classifying things as exercise for everybody. Exercise can be a bad word for some people. And I get it, right? They have the idea of HIIT classes or CrossFit, and they're like, whoa, no scenario. Okay, but not what you can't do. What can you do? What works for you? Sometimes people come and they say, I have no idea where to start. Well, what do you like to do? I've never really exercised. Do you like to walk? Yeah, I like being outside. Okay, well, let's start there. So the very first thing I always say is take a look and see what you can start doing now. Even if it's 2 days a week, 15-minute walks, let's get moving. You're going to start feeling a little bit better. Put that objective in place. And the reality is, as human beings, we generally, most of us, don't do well with wholesale change. I'm going to do everything at once. And I have clients that are ready to do that, but I have to kind of temper that, right? I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to be in the gym 6 days a week. Well, that's why the gym is really crowded in January and empty again in February, right? Because people dive in, this is what I'm going to do, and it's not sustainable. And so then what happens is they miss once, they miss twice, 60% likelihood you miss your habit twice that it's going to go away, 60% after 2 times. So I always say small, bite-sized, 1% changes, building blocks like Legos. And that's easy to define for an individual where it's not painful. I have people that garden and they love that. That's up, down, motion, moving, carrying, all of that's included. So whatever it works for you is where you start.
Great, great. So the next big area is mental and emotional well-being. And that, can mean a lot of things to different people depending on where you are in your life and your well-being in those areas. But how can individuals cultivate mental and emotional resilience? Because, from my experience, regardless of how strong you are in those areas, something's always going to happen at some point in your life that sort of rocks you a little bit. And so that resilience aspect is very important to coming back to a good level, if you will. And so what advice do you have around that?
Yeah, you have to be proactive in this area for sure, right? And get a little bit out of your comfort zone, and I'll explain. Resiliency is the word. So that's a perfect way to put it, because resilience is I faced the challenge. I have either succeeded, I got out of my comfort zone, I had succeeded, or I didn't. I won't use the word fail because it's the learning opportunity. And even if there's a lack of success in an objective, there's resiliency built because you realize, oh, I survived. Now I just have to readjust and change it. But from an emotional well-being standpoint, I like to use the analogy of the balloon. Things that we experience in life, pressures, stressors, it's like having air in the balloon. And, we know what happens when there's too much air, right? Even if it never bursts, that tension we feel, right? That expansion. So you have one of two possibilities. The first possibility is letting air out. How do you let air out? Well, go back to exercise. Keystone habits like journaling can be very cathartic, very therapeutic. Spiritual practices, which is one of the big six, but meditation, breath work exercises. Now, appreciate too that you have somebody that was in law enforcement for 25 years. And now I do things like meditate and journal and breath work to get my mind from what it used to be, that rigid mindset that is government, that is law enforcement, to where it is now. I have to truly believe in it. But those practices are letting the air out of the balloon. But we can also restrict the air that comes in. How do we do that? Well, we do it by being proactive and crafting a life around our values and what we want, things that we've already spoken about. We also do it by what we will allow to impact us, what we will allow to affect us, focusing on the right things, our mindset going in. Do you go approach life optimistic or pessimistic? Those types of things can also control the stress in our life. So that's what I mean by sort of that physical and emotional well-being. And then, of course, or that emotional and mental well-being. And of course, that if it's to a point where, and this is really the cutoff for coaching, when anxiety is at a point or depression's at a point, anger's at a point, any negative emotions at a point where it's really having a debilitating effect in your life, where it's really having an impact that you're having severe difficulty moving on from, that's therapy time, right? That moves us beyond coaching. Sometimes people do it in tandem. There's a lot of great therapists that I actually work with the same client on. But there's a delineation there. And oftentimes people will come to coaching and then I'll start to assess. And there are times where I'll say, listen, this is something that we want to get straight in therapy first. I'm happy to work with you. But that's the other aspect of having that overall well-being, is making sure that you're taking care of yourself mentally as well.
I'm going to take this as an opportunity to put a plug in for other business owners that are on this call. Something that we recently implemented at SKC, I want to say October 1st, we're piloting it now through the end of the year, is we've actually hired a therapist on retainer. And so she has given us every Thursday, each week, 1 day a week, we keep her on retainer, and any one of our team members can make an appointment with her and talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about. And obviously we have no idea as, the business owners, what they talk about or anything like that, but it's an offering that we can make to our team members to help support their mental health and well-being, in a different environment than, say having to go through your health insurance to find a counselor or a therapist or something like that. So, I can certainly report back at the end of our pilot period and let everybody know how it went. But so far, we've gotten some really good feedback from folks. So I think, just to speak to those business owners in the audience, there's lots of other things that we can do and resources we can provide to our team to support, their own mental health and well-being. Now, of course, as I always say, we can't care more than they do. So we can provide the resource, but we can't force them to use it. So I think we have to look at that with every situation that we provide for our team members. But Andrew, you talked about specifically meditation and journaling as some techniques that you personally use to sort of manage stress and anxiety. Are there any others that you would recommend to the group for that?
Yeah, it kind of brings us to the next area, Sarah. It's the spiritual aspect, right? It's the spirituality aspect. So journaling, meditation, very spiritual aspects of life, very spiritual practices, as is yoga, as is exercise to some degree, right? But when people think about spirituality, they often think and equate it with religion. And that's okay. For me, I wouldn't say so much it's religion, but there is a God focus to my life, right? So there is faith in my life. But when I deal with clients or when I'm working with clients, I don't advocate that per se. I talk about spirituality as just being open to the idea that there might be a greater purpose than us, whether it's a sentient being out there, or whether it's the universe, the trees, or whether it's simply gratitude, giving, assisting, philanthropy, whatever that is. Those are all parts of spirituality. It's something that extends past ourselves. And that manifests itself differently for different people and how they express that and what they do with that. But I do think that that goes a long way to support the other areas of life, is looking upon spiritual practices, developing and being open to some sort of spirituality in your life.
Is that the hardest area to get your clients to lean into?
It depends, but yes, generally speaking. And it's one of those areas that I really have to leverage my background with to say, like, hey, this is where I came from and this is where I'm at now. Because some people are turned off to religion, and the minute they hear that word, they put the walls up. So I have to really talk about that. I've had some unique experiences, though. There's one client that I had that came to me as a self-professed atheist. And so I never talked about my faith or God or anything. I was very respectful of his beliefs. But we did talk about this idea of giving things up for the universe or putting things out there. You know, younger people on the call will know it as manifestation, law of attraction. And there's truth to that when you talk about focus and directing your energy. But what was interesting is he said, you know, it's funny, he would talk about it. I put this out there and it came back. And then one session he said, he came in and he said, you know, God is funny. And I went, who? Because there was like sort of this message that he felt he had gotten, and this relationship that sort of had developed just by keeping his mind open. But regardless of how it manifests itself, it's just one of those practices that can be very enriching. But yeah, it can be a roadblock sometimes. So I'm very careful with that.
So that concept of manifestation that you talked about is basically the whole theme of the book, which is also a movie now called The Secret. So if anybody's interested in more information, I'm sure you have a lot of resources beyond just that, but that's kind of what I always look at as the beginning foundation of that concept and that idea of manifestation, is that book, which again was later a movie called The Secret. So I'm going to take this block of, we're talking now about spirituality and sort of inner fulfillment, and I'm going to bring you back a little bit to what you started with, which was talking about values, because I think this kind of fits into this area the best. What role do our individual values and the overall concept of purpose play in in living a fulfilled life?
I think it's probably one of the most fundamental components of living a life that's fulfilling, joy-filled, happy. Even if you're in a place, I have a client now who's in a profession, she's been in that profession for getting on 30 years, not quite 60 yet, is looking at 65 as a retirement date, but is pretty checked out and is pretty burnt out. And so she came to coaching for that reason. What we did was we looked at what her day looked like. And she's in a leadership position. And a lot of her day is adding value to the staff. But she wasn't focusing on that aspect of her day. She was focusing on the negative aspect of her day. But when we revisited her values and then had a discussion and analyzed what she does on a regular basis and how that matches her values, and that about 85% of her day was being spent in line with her values, it was like the veil lifted. It was like a cloud lifted. She's like, oh my God, I'm just focusing on the wrong thing. And that's what it was, focusing on the 15% and not the 85%. So that's where, when we really get intentional, and of course, making decisions going forward. And if she does decide to stop working at 65, but doesn't want to stop entirely or wants to do something different, well, let's make sure we get that one right? Because now there's an opportunity. You have an income, you have a retirement income, whatever it might look like. And now you want to work, let's work different. Let's get a profession that really meets the values. Is it mentoring younger people because you like that aspect of service and raising people up? Whatever it looks like, but that exploration of values will kind of direct you there.
Great. And I do want to circle back. You also talked about journaling, and I think this fits into the mental and emotional well-being piece, and also the spiritual piece when you talk about cultivating your values and understanding your values and that sort of inner reflection. And, you and I both journal every morning. It's part of our, very regimented morning routine. Anybody who knows us knows what that routine is, and that it starts at 4:45 in the morning. But for those on the call and, in the audience who may not know where to start with journaling, right? Staring at a blank page can seem silly or daunting. I know I've gotten lots of benefits from it in my life of doing it, but how would you advise somebody who wants to take a step in this direction and incorporate journaling into their routine morning day. But really the thought of staring at that blank page just sort of turns them off.
Yeah, that's I don't know where to begin kind of thing. So I'll give you a cheat code first. The cheat code is I have journaling prompts that I'm certainly happy to send anybody. They're questions that we can consider on a daily basis. So we call them journaling prompts. The other thing that I often recommend is start with this sentence: I don't know where to begin, and see what happens. Or I don't know why I'm doing this. Or I want to try this. Let's see what happens. And then let's see what the next thought is, and just let it kind of free flow. The other thing that I like, and this was something that happened to me not that long ago, which I never thought would happen. As you remember, we were up in Vermont and my cousin came to visit. My cousin's like a sister to me. And we had such a great time. It was the first time Sarah was meeting my cousin. And all I could think about was my paternal grandfather and how pleased he would have been. My paternal grandfather and I were up close. How pleased he would have been of this coming together of the cousins. My brother was there, and how the family was together. So that now I'm trying not to get emotional. So that next morning, my journaling was writing a letter to my grandfather. And it started with, Grandpa, you would have been so happy. Debbie was here. And I just went on and on and on and talked about all of that. It was probably one of the most uplifting journaling. So long story, but the short answer is write it to somebody, write a letter to somebody to start as well. But if you want to get started, I certainly have those journaling prompts. Or start with that sentence: I don't know where to begin, and see where your mind goes. It's a great practice. It doesn't have to be rule-based. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. Some days I write for 45 seconds. I have my parents come over for dinner and I'm writing for an hour the next day. So it can be whatever it might be, wherever it takes you. So whatever you have to say that day.
Stream of consciousness.
Exactly right.
So I'm going to ask that, you'll send Brittany the journaling prompts and we can send them out in the email to every registrant when they get the link for the video, if that's okay.
You got it.
Okay, let's move a little bit towards relationships and people and social connections and interactions is the next area. And, how do you define meaningful relationships having an impact in the holistic approach of living well and living your best life? Because, we talked in the beginning about compartmentalizing and having issues with your children or having issues with your significant other, having issues with colleagues at work. How does this aspect, relationships between people, impact us in our best life?
There's a saying, a belief that says you are a direct result of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I believe there's truth to that. Whether the number is a hard 5 or not, could be more. I do believe there's truth to that. And so when I look at meaningful relationships, I look at what's called bidirectional value. Is there value in this relationship to you? Is there value in the relationship to the other person? And that value could just be relief, happiness, an outlet, love, connection, whatever that value might be for you. But it's not a dread. It's not hindrance. It's not a negative. And then if it is, then what we'll do in coaching a lot is talk about boundaries. Sometimes we're talking about how to repair, how to meet back, how to get back together if it was once healthy. And if it's not, if it never was, how to extricate, why are you holding on, and that type of thing. But the people that we spend our time with can have a direct influence over how we feel, how we are fulfilled. That said, I do want to take a little bit of care here, because I always push back against the idea that when somebody says, well, if they would just do this, then I could be happy. Well, you've then abdicated your power. If you're relying on somebody else for your happiness, you're really down a bad path, because then where does that end? And now you've given up control. So the control there might be, how do I either isolate myself emotionally, mentally, physically from that negative influence? How do I guard against it, get it out of my life? Or how do I change it? How do I get it to a place to get them to understand, particularly if it's an intimate relationship, if it's a partner or spouse, that type of thing, and you're not, there's a lot of history, but something has gone awry, then it's strategizing. How do we get it back on track to the extent that it can be? So it's critical. It's a critical component of our life, because it will have such a profound impact on us. And it's worthy of introspection, a look, and work for sure. Not to embarrass you, but you know how much effort we put into our relationship. We have relationship check-ins periodically. We hold financial meetings. We do those things because we know how important it is. And so those meaningful relationships require time, attention, and work. But we want to make sure that when they're taking more than they're giving, we're either resetting or putting up boundaries.
Right. Absolutely. I think everybody on this call would agree with you that relationships of any kind take work if we're going to maintain them and keep them healthy. And so my question to you is, what are some ways to nurture our relationships, to sustain them and help them thrive and be healthy, to complement our best life?
There's practical aspects, right? There's relationship exercises that I use in coaching, and talk about the past, what was then, what's different now. But I'll stay away from that for a second. And what I'll kind of focus on is mindset. Oftentimes we interpret what somebody is doing as a direct reflection of us, and we're not taking the time to understand what really might be going on behind the scenes, right? To take it out of an intimate relationship and just put it onto an interaction. Imagine going down a highway and you get cut off, and the fingers flying, you're leaning on the horn, and you're off the rails angry. Because why? Because you're viewing that as something that was done directly to you. It's a violation of your rights. It's a violation of your standards. And so anger kicks in. If a mile down the road, you saw that same car pull into an emergency room parking lot, open the back door, grab their kid, and run inside, your whole perspective would change. So what was interpreted as an act against us and judgment against the other person is now an act of love and panic because they're experiencing this event, and you would change your whole entire perspective of it. So if we can start there, particularly with our close relationships, and understand what might be going on with the other person and question the way we think about the way we're thinking in that spot, that's a good place to have the conversation. It's a good place to put the work in, especially if it was good and is no longer, or it was healthy and is now challenged. What happened? What went wrong? Who changed? What changed? How do we get back to a place where it was, to the extent that that's possible? But it starts with inner questions first. Not so much, this is clearly what they're doing, but more, why am I interpreting this way? What else could be going on? Why is this affecting me so much? And then opening the conversation.
Well, I think some of the key components of healthy relationships go back to emotional intelligence and empathy. But to your point, it has to start with you individually and inside, because that's really all that we can ultimately control. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, empathy is I'm happy you brought that up, because that is the word, right? And then when I talk about being introspective and understanding where they're at, that's the word. That sums it up in one word.
So anybody who's familiar with the book, and again, it was a Netflix special called The Blue Zone. I don't know why people must not read anymore, because everything that's good that was put into writing as a book is now becoming a movie or a documentary, but that's for a different conversation. But if you're familiar with that, one of the key areas that they highlight when they've done all of the research in the different blue zones in the world of people who've lived to over 100, the centenarians, one of the very, very key pieces is social connection. And that, that goes beyond a spouse or a significant other, that goes beyond children. That's an environmental, community, social connection piece. So they've done lots of research on the importance of that in as much as it leads to longevity. But from your perspective, how can one create that supportive social environment, right? If we're the product of, or we're a related product of the 5 people that we're most likely around or most frequently around, how do we create the best social connection that we possibly can?
Yeah, that social connection is huge. In the blue zones talked about those 3 components, right? It was physical activity, nutrition, social connection, right? Those were the 3 components to a life well lived, quality of life and longevity. So how do you find it, right? Go where your people are. And so what do I mean by that? So what are your likes? What are your interests? Find your people, whether they're groups, whether they're philanthropic, whether they're work people. Where are your people? Find your people with similar likes. And look at the power of community. Even when you're fighting addiction, the power of community is what saves a lot of people, and finding your people that are in the same struggle. So all of that is very, very critical. It doesn't, to your point, have to be intimate relationships. And I would count among the 5 that group. So if I have a community that I spend time with, that's one of your five, if you will, right? It doesn't have to be five individual people. That's one aspect of your five that you spend the most time with. But there's not going to be a situation ever, and I rarely talk in definitives, but there's not going to be a situation where you can't find like-minded people. You can't find people to associate with, people to develop relationships with, finding a community around a central purpose, a central desire. So that's where I would start.
So the next big area
Mhm.
coming to the end of the list here, personal growth and development. And I'm a huge proponent of continuously learning, continual self-improvement, whether that's from a technical standpoint in your professional world or, the soft skills and, just general learning. Can you share with us some practices for setting and achieving your personal growth and development goals?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that, right? If you're not growing, you're dying, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's always important to be growing, and um, it could be growing in that spiritual aspect of our life or that emotional aspect of our life, and setting objectives there, or in the intellectual component. That's probably the easiest, most tangible one to focus on. But if there are things that you want to learn and objectives you want to set for yourself intellectually, that can transcend your professional life, just things you're interested in, things you want to know, learning a good skill, how good that is for you cognitively, learning new things and the longevity of your brain. So even if that's your only motivation in learning things that interest you, that's enough. That's salient enough. That's profound enough. So how do you do it? So it goes back to goal setting as a whole, and that SMART model, if you will, making the time for it, making it important, making it a must. So that SMART model, just briefly, specific, measurable, actionable, right? We can act on it. Realistic. I mean, try as I might, I'll never be an NFL quarterback at this point in my life. So it's got to be realistic as well. And then time bound, right? So putting a timetable to it. So if we look at something like, oh my God, I always wanted to learn Spanish. Oh my God, I always wanted to learn how to play the guitar. Where does that fit in your life right now? What can you do? How does that impact you? When do you want to do what by? I want to be good. I want to finish this module by this date. I want to be fluent by this date, whatever that looks like. But be intentional about it. Get it on your calendar. Make the time for it. That's how we set those objectives and succeed. In addition to that is don't overload, right? Do it in those aspects. And that I can be guilty of this at times, right? I can be guilty of, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And so I have to step back and prioritize. And I watch you look at me and kind of nod and go, yeah, okay, let's slow your roll here a little bit. And that's a good check for me. But, I have so many wants, desires, and ambitions that I continually want to move forward. I have to prioritize. So it's prioritize, schedule, make the time for it.
So it's a good segue to my next question, which is, obviously with your clients, you serve in a role in so a sort of way as the accountability partner, right? For, each session you're saying, okay, what did we talk about last session? And so you have that built in with your clients. But for those of us that may not have a coaching relationship, how do you advise that we overcome the challenges and setbacks in our personal journeys? I mean, it's going to happen. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to not hit our goals, not hit our objectives. So how do you approach that, with your clients to overcome the challenges or the setbacks that they meet up with?
There's a lot of information sometimes in the fact that somebody didn't hit a goal or got derailed. That information can be anything from it was too ambitious of a goal at this point. It could be I didn't use the right time blocking strategy, the right scheduling strategy. But there's information there, there's data there that we can learn from to then try to reset it and get on the right path. That's the first thing. It could also be a deep-seated self-limiting belief. I never really truly believed I could accomplish it or I was worthy of it, right? So there's some things to unwind from the past. There might be an emotional component behind it that we have to unwind and work through when we talk about worth and value and how important it is to you. But accountability is a piece of that as well. And I think that's important. Accountability, I love the idea of an accountability partner. Yes, I serve that role for many of my clients, so much so that I'll be texting on a weekend, hey, I know this was coming up. How'd you do? That type of thing. But accountability can be as simple as just putting it out there. I'm going to do this because what's going to happen? Invariably, the people you meet again are going to go, how are you doing with that? And that's coming. So there's that piece of it that can help you to keep you accountable as well. But if something's not working, again, what we want to avoid is that cognitive distortion of all or nothing. Didn't work, so therefore I'm done. I didn't get 3 days of workout this week, therefore I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay, let's just look at why. What happened? Was it the right goal? Was it the right strategy? Is there a belief in you that you can't do it? What's happening? Let's unwind it, because my experience working with a lot of people and in my own life, there's very few things we can't accomplish when they're important to us and we put our mind to it. So it's really just the reset at that point, is identifying what went wrong, what went south, and then resetting it.
So we've come to the last big 6 area, and it's our professional life, right? And I didn't create a lot of space in this hour for the professional area because we've done a lot of SKC office hours and a lot of other presentations around your professional, how to be better and all of those related things. But Andrew, I do want to give you the opportunity, since it is one of the big core 6 areas, to talk a little bit about the professional area and how you work with your clients in developing those areas. I know you alluded to it a little bit with having it strongly related to your values and how important that is. So if you could just discuss a little bit about that, that would be great.
Sure. And I think it's stage of life dependent. So if you're on the younger side, just starting out, there's a lot of opportunity. I don't care what you went to school for, right? I've had many people come to me, I got a degree in marketing and I hate it. Okay, well, that's fine. You're in your 20s. Let's talk about a reset. Where else can we apply that degree? What else can we do with it? Do you want to go back to school while you're working? So that's one stage of life. The other stage of life is I'm towards the end. Certainly not of life, but of maybe a potential career, right? So I'm winding down. I don't want to retire. I want to retire from my job. I don't want to retire from purpose. So then it's the idea of, okay, let's get in touch with what you can do next, whether it is philanthropic or there's still a need to earn. How do we craft a life, and getting clear on those values? And then there's the other stage. The other stage is what I call the can't go yet, right? And I'm in it. So then it's finding the joy in it. You have an opportunity, regardless of what you do, on how you show up. And so, you could be a barista at Starbucks and you might not be thrilled with that job. But we know this. Walking into a Starbucks when somebody's uplifted can change your entire experience and can have an impact on your day. I walked into the Denville Starbucks yesterday after I left your office, and I was greeted by "Welcome in." That's what she said with a big smile on her face. And I was like, oh, that felt good, right? That just felt good. It uplifted. She has a choice. She can do it disingenuously. She can do it with earnest. She can do it the right way. So we all have an opportunity to, regardless of where we're at, to approach it with a certain mindset and to add value to other people. I don't care what you're doing, you can be a positive force. I encourage people to read, I think, about the bad apple study. I won't get into the details of it, but it was a guy by the name of William Phelps that just talked about the impact that one individual can have on a group and in an environment. Now, he took it from the negative perspective and he interjected people that were negative in those groups, but it's easily the inverse. You can make that draw, you can make that conclusion, is coming in at it overly positive and the impact that that can have on an entire environment. And at the end of the day, I always say, what do you want your legacy to be? When you're getting ready to retire, do you want them to say, get out of here, see ya, good riddance? Or do you want them to say, man, that guy taught me, that woman really raised me up. She had a profound impact in my life. Those are the opportunities we have, regardless of the profession that we're in.
And you talked earlier about spending at a minimum, for the most part, 8 hours a day in your professional environment, right? With your colleagues, in that office space. And so I think it becomes all the more important when we look at it that way, from a time, which you also said is a very finite resource, of finding the right home for yourself and finding the right, don't just treat it as a job. Don't just treat it as something you have to get through in that day. We're all too important as people to treat ourselves that way. And so it might take a little bit of work on the front end, but it's much, much more satisfying and worth it to really find your home in your job or career.
Yeah, it's that cliche expression, but I love it. You can always earn another dollar. You can't buy another hour. And that's an important perspective, right? So the time value of money, how are you going to spend your time?
So Andrew, resources for the audience, are there books, are there apps, are there podcasts that you can recommend to us on any of these areas, or the overall concept in total?
Millions, right? So I'll give you a couple of just my favorite books to start with. Atomic Habits, great book. Think Again, great book. The Four Agreements, great book. Go Giver, another great one. So I love those. And I love the idea of podcasts. I don't recommend specific ones only because they're so nuanced, but do some research, find out what interests you, find out what you're looking to learn and dive into it. It's great. And if Audible's your thing, download that app, listen to books in the car. The University of YouTube, another great resource. Find people you like. Like for me, I can listen to Simon Sinek all day. And, so finding his resources online and listen to him speak on leadership and corporate culture, and hour-long presentations, workshops, no cost. So there's plenty out there, but feed the mind. That's the underlying point. Feed your mind.
So we'll include those 4 book resources in the email that we send out as a follow-up as well. Thank you for that. And so where can someone start? If this last hour has inspired anybody to take next steps to improving their whole life or improving some of the areas that they may feel are lacking, how would you recommend they begin?
Introspection. That's the starting point. So if you take those 6 areas and just spend time in intentional introspection, and what I mean by that is time and quiet and just think. And whether you have a list of the 6 areas, relationships, and then give yourself time to think. Maybe you do it with a journal in your hand. If that seems daunting or challenging, or you really think, I don't know if I can focus, I got to try to remember what was included in that, just reach out to me. I'll send you the form. If you fill it out and submit it, I'm going to get a copy. So you don't have to do that. You can absolutely just look at it, read through it, answer it in a journal. If you want to submit it, talk to me about it. I'm more than happy to do that as well. But that's a good place to start because it really breaks these areas down and asks some provocative questions.
And so that's a good beginning to our closing, is that Andrew has offered a free 30-minute coaching session to anyone who has been on this office hours today. So we will include his contact information in the email that we send out with the link and some of the other resources that we've talked about today so that you can reach out to him as well. And also, I know that you have a workshop coming up in the beginning of 2025 in January. Do you want to give the audience a little information about that?
Sure. I partnered with a colleague. She's phenomenal. She's in the mental health space. She's a counselor, also a burgeoning yoga instructor. She's almost done. And we're doing the 6 Pillars of Wellness workshop it's the second Friday, I believe, in January. But if you throw my email in there, if somebody emails me is interested in that, I'll send it out. We're looking right now at about 25 slots, and it's really a great way to set up these objectives for 2025. That's my goal with this workshop. Our goal with this workshop is to get you to think about these areas, analyze these areas, and then establish those objectives, those visions, and some of the goals to get to those visions by the end of 2025. So that's the premise of it. But I can send the information out to anybody that's interested.
Terrific. And Brittany did just put your contact information in the chat for anybody that wants to pop over there really quickly and grab that. Andrew, thank you so much for being here. It was a joy after 5 years of doing office hours. It's an honor to have you on finally as a guest. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I want to thank our audience today for joining us. I hope that this inspired your Friday and will continue on into the weekend. We actually have our next topic for office hours. For those of you that may be blindly unaware, there is an election coming up next month. And so our December office hours is going to be on tax law changes related to the election. So totally different mind space and vibe from this presentation, but necessary nonetheless. So watch our social media feeds for the next December office hours. And we thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful, safe, and happy rest of the day, and enjoy your weekend, everybody. Thank you so much.